Welcome to week 5. In this week we will make this energy barrier. It's quite a complicated effect. So we'll have to do a lot of mesh editing and a lot of materials as well as new textures. I'm also going to be going back and forth to the other windows to check how I did the materials because the materials are really complex and I don't remember everything just from memory. So if you see me drifting off for a few seconds, it's probably what I'm going to be doing. So just to give you an overview. Hello and welcome to week 5. In this week we will make this energy barrier. It's quite a complicated effect. So we'll have to do a lot of mesh editing and a lot of materials as well as new textures. I'm also going to be going back and forth to the other windows to check how I did the materials because the materials are really complex and I don't remember everything just from memory. So if you see me drifting off for a few seconds, it's probably what I'm going to be doing. So just to give you an overview, this effect is composed of different meshes. You don't have to do everything in one shader. Making meshes with proper UVs can actually help you a lot in making complicated effects like this become a lot easier and a lot more doable and even cheaper in a way, because you don't have to do everything in the actual material. If you use UVs and meshes, you'll be better off, and to keep your own sanity as well. So there's a bunch of pieces. We got this piece over here, which is a simple plane. And as you can see, when it intersects the floor, it does this energy field kind of thing to it. And again, like if it intersects other places, it will give us this intersection lines, which is pretty cool. Then we got this mesh over here. It is like this kind of shape, several of them. They're all sharing the same UV. So I do it when one of them and it gets propagated to all of them. Also, I might say this actually has two UV sets. One of them is just, this polygonal shape that is propagated to all the other ones, and another one which is actually the whole thing. So we're moving noises and stuff like that through it, so we get this random pattern. Afterwards, we have this one over here, which is very similar. It's a very similar mesh, but as you can see, this one has a lot more edges, and this one basically squares that are rotated. So this also gives it a different, a different look to the actual overall effect. And then we have this guy over here. Sorry, this one. It's actually the shape around this one. So we can see the energy sweeping through. And that's it. So we're going to be recreating these meshes and these materials. And hopefully we're going to have a really kick-ass energy barrier. So let's get started. Alright, so I've hidden the other barrier pieces so we can fully focus on this one. And this one is nothing more than a very simple plane, as you can see there. Nothing special about the UVs either, just planar UVs. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to start the material from scratch. You can see I've not been very good at organizing this because I actually started this effect before I recorded the other lessons of the course, since this was for the actual trailer. We're going to make this and we're going to call it barrier, and we're going to call it, well, let's call it the first element. The first element of this barrier. And I'm going to move it down here, and I'm actually going to assign our new one to it. And I'm also going to duplicate this one. Didn't duplicate. So I have to duplicate it here. Oh, it's Control W. I thought it was Control D. So I'm gonna move it. See, it's kind of cool. Yeah, this is used a lot in several different types of effects. You know, Winston from Overwatch has a very similar effect with his shield. Sorry, not Winston. Actually, Winston's as well. But there's Reinhardt. He has his shield has a similar effect. Winston has a barrier also with a similar effect to this. At least from what I see, I don't actually work on Overwatch. And there's also, you know, a lot of sci-fi games, you know, shields or maps going across. Uncharted also has a few things like this in multiplayer. The Last of Us as well. You know, when Joel is using his vision in The Last of Us 1, he also has a similar effect. And I did a lot of this in Killzone as well. I forgot for which particular purpose. I think it was just and at Crytek as well for some Homefront stuff. So I'm going to put this on the side there so I can visually compare if something is going really weird so we can get a similar result. And I'm going to grab our effect, the first element, and I'm actually going to use it here. And a few things popped to my mind already. So I'm actually going to grab the one that I previously named the ring, radial ring, and a few things, of course. Out of the bat, we want to make this a translucent effect because we definitely can see the other side, and we want to make this unlit. It's kind of well, not magical, but energy effect. We definitely don't need to have it lit. Let's see if I did anything else here. I don't think so. Nope. So we can go ahead and start making the material. So first thing I'm going to do is add a texture coordinate. Texture coordinate, like so. This is using UV 0. And I'm going to change my tiling to 0.3, 0.3. I'm going to add a panner. And I'm going to connect this too. So move this away so we have a little bit more space. Also want a texture sample, and I want to use this noise I did here. You know, I procedurally generated this noise in a different package like Photoshop, and I made sure it's stylable. So, you know, make sure you create your own noise, and we'll go with that. So let's connect this two, and let's copy these two. Oh, actually, sorry, let's not copy them yet. I want to add these together with some other texture that we're gonna have. So right now I'm just grabbing that texture, making it smaller, and panning it. And as for panning, we're gonna move on the y-axis. We're gonna move 2 units. So we already got something there. So I'm gonna add a time node and a multiply. And I'm gonna change the multiply to 0.2. So it's slowing down time. You know, time as a constant would be 1, but right now I want only 20% of the amount of time that passes. I'm going to add another panner, and I'm going to connect this to the other panner. I'm going to connect this to time, and I want another texture coordinate, so I'm going to copy and paste this one, and I'm going to plug it there. And this one is going to be 1 and 0.3. So these two are connected. move this up so I can mimic what I have there. And actually it's not that one, it's this one. So we got penner, coordinates, time, and I want to make sure the speed y is 0.4. And I'm going to connect to this texture again. So we have it moving fast with a very large scale, and we have it moving slow with a smaller scale. All right, so we have these two so far. And I'm going to add another one. Another penner, another texture coordinate. So let's double check this one. This one is 1, 1. So this is going to be standard scale. And this one is going to be 0.3 in y, not 0.4. All right. And we're going to add these two together. It's going to create an add node. Add this one and this one. So we can actually visualize how it does look like right now. So right now it will look something like this. We have one moving across the other one. Some are slower, some are faster. Now this add, I'm going to add this result to that one that we originally did. I'm actually going to change this to be a bit more readable, like so. I'm going to add this to emissive. So we got these adds, and then we got another add, and now I want to multiply this by 0.2. And also multiply the top one. Let me just double check, it's 0.7. So I actually want to multiply this by that. So we got something like that. Actually, it's moving a little bit too much compared to what I have in my original example. Probably have a penner here that's very 0.4, 0.3, and this one is 0.2. Okay, so that is correct. Oh, this one is not connected anywhere. Okay, so that's where the mistake is. So, all right, so that's a bit better. It still doesn't really match what I did before. So let me double check. 0.2. We add it, and it's adding against the other add, which is the first two, and multiplying it by 0.2. Oh, okay. I see. And we also have time. Time is actually connected. Let's just copy this node again. We have a time connected to this guy as well. Actually, we can use this one. It's actually connected to this one here. So this time I added at the very end because I thought everything was too fast. So this is like an overall control over all the times. So by multiplying this value, I will change all of them at the same time. So that's where the confusion was. You know, so instead of me going here, I like the percentage differences. Like, you know, I like this one to be 0.4, this 2.3, and this 2.2. And then I just want to have like a global control. So, you know, if I want to make everything faster, I just come here and I make everything faster. If I want to make everything slower, I'll just make everything slower. So we have this part working, so I'm gonna take this out of the way. That's our first levels of detail. And all right, so we have that part done. Now I'm gonna go to the second stage. All right, so let's do the second phase. So let's add another texture coordinate. And another one. So you see, this effect is going to be quite complex. So I'm going to work like these little bits. You know, I do a little bit of nodes, and then I'll do another bit of nodes, and then I'll kind of mix them together. So I'm going to add a few panners. Copy 2 of them. Just plug stuff like we are used to do, very basic stuff. And I want to drag this texture here and this texture here. This texture, again, it's the same noise, but I just added like a very strong contrast in Photoshop to make it look like this. So I'm gonna plug this here and this one here, and I'm gonna make sure these are one, the texture coordinate size. As for speed, this is very, very slow. This one is 0.05 and this one is 0.06. And now what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to multiply them together. And because I don't like the fact they're so strong, because we are going to add them together with that, and we can check what's happening here. I actually want to multiply this by 0.2, so it's more faint. Now I'm going to clamp. I'm going to put a clamp here to make sure this will never go over a certain value. I'm going to clamp, and my minimum is going to be 0.05, and I want to make sure that this one, so we gotta multiply 0.2 and make sure this one goes into this one, so we keep consistency. So afterwards, I'll multiply this by 6 to really boost it times 6. Still see nothing, so I think something weird is happening. I need to see what's going on here. Multiply 6 to another adds. Oh, here we go. So we got this faint lines here. So I was missing this step here. I'm gonna crank it up by 6 again. I probably could make this a lot simpler and cleaner by eliminating a lot of these, but again, in real production, this is probably the way it would happen, which is you keep adding stuff on top of it till you have something that works, and then if you have time, then you go back and you start cleaning it, you know, and make sure you eliminate the ones you don't need to make sure that everything would be a bit more optimized. So I'm going to add this to the same clamp. See, like this, I could probably do it differently. Right now I'm adding on top of adds and then multiplying, because the value I got initially was not the perfect value. So I'm going to multiply this by 1.35. And let's see what this gives us. Also going to take it off from opacity. All right. So we got, let me try to, so we got this like this. Doesn't look like much now, but you can see that there's energy flowing through some of the other energy. so it's a tiny detail, but you know, if you look close, you would be able to see it. So 1.55, and now we're gonna go back. See, so all this chain here, also gonna stop reviewing the node. So you see, so this is actually where we're getting this. So we're gonna have like the blue haze later, and we got this stronger effect, like moving away. And all this chain here is just for this tiny element, because now we're gonna go back to this one over here, and we are gonna actually add these two together. So we're gonna add this one that we did, that has that very little element to it, and add to the one we originally had. And if I plug in this here, you can see now we have something a bit more complex looking. We have the smaller bits that are adding with the actual other energy flowing, and we get this kind of liquidy effect to it. And since this is a bit too strong, I'm actually going to multiply this by 0.8. And we can actually check to see how it looks. So it's a little bit more subtle. So now let's add some color to this. I'm going to add a vector 3, and I'm going to copy my color value. Let me see if I can. So green value is going to be 2703, and this one is this value here, and blue is 6 as far as I remember. Let me double check. So 6, 2703, and 246, and for some reason didn't do anything. 2.703, and this was 6. Okay, that looks correct. And I'm going to multiply. So, okay. So it was probably too strong, so I'm going to multiply this by 0.4. Sorry, by 4, so it was not strong enough. So we're going to get that bloom going. See, in this case, you know, there's two multiplies here. I could very likely delete one of them and just add, you know, I would do the math of this one and math to this one and then add them together to know exactly the value I would need. But multiplies are not too expensive if they're used this way, so that's okay. So I'm going to add that multiply 4, and I put the desaturate. I did not recall why I'm using a desaturate here, but I'm going to keep it just in case, so my chain is identical. And if I can right click here, you can see that it's starting to bloom. I'm going to stop previewing this node. I'm going to add, and the add is actually going to the emission color. Right now it's fully white because we still need to add something else to it. And this multiply here also branches off. And I'm in a texture called upper mask. There's a texture here, which seems almost full white, but it's not. You can see that there's a little black to it up there and a little fade. So everything here is going to be opaque and everything there is going to be fully transparent. And this texture is set to sRGB. We're wrapping it, so we're not actually clamping it. And I didn't change any of the compression settings. So I'm going to go back. And I'm going to multiply that by this guy here. If I preview, you can see the top is clear. You know, that's how I got the little clear top here. And everything else is kind of opaque. So multiply, And this multiply will go into opacity. Very simply. Alright. So right now we have this. So we have another time node. I'm multiplying this by 0.6, so I'm slowing down time. I'm introducing sine wave here. So a sine wave, I don't know if we used this one before, but basically we'll loop, or ping pong I should say, from one value to another. I believe it's from 1 to -1, like that. And I'm multiplying this after the wave, the sine wave, by 6. And I'm also going to introduce a constant of 40 to really crank this up. And this one by 6. Again, the values, you know, what makes sense for me necessarily doesn't make sense for your version. So keep in mind that. Also going to add a 1 for opacity, a depth fade, so right now it's fully opaque, and I'm going to add this to the actual fade distance. All right, and I'm going to lerp these, linear interpolate. I'm going to have the depth fade as my alpha. I'm going to add black as my B, and I'm going to add another color, which I need to copy, which is, so it's 4, 24, and 8.5. Just double check. Oh, it's actually 50. Unreal. Why do you do this to me? So I remember it's 50. I'm gonna click OK because it's quite annoying. Okay, copy that. 24. And this is 4. Okay. You got this color here. I'm going to add this to A. Multiplies by the lerp. Then I'm going to add this to the multiplied value of the first one we did. So I'm going to add there, which now, as you know, doesn't make any sense, but that's because we're still missing one piece of the puzzle. So I'm going to add a panner here, and I'm going to move it 0.5, and I'm going to add it to this texture here, which is the contrasty texture. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to move this one. It's going to be multiplied by that, and this add will be the second input of this add here. And if I compare it to my original one, that goes into opacity. All right, so all this goes into color, and then multiply goes into opacity. But still, we're getting a very different result. So let's go back a few steps and fix what's incorrect. I got the clamp, add, and it's adding this thing here, And one thing I missed was I had another multiply that had the clamp going into it. And then this one doesn't actually exist. Multiply 0.2. Multiply by the clamp. And then multiply by 6. Still missing something here. So multiply 0.2, multiply by the clamp, multiply by 6, and then you had these two together. Actually, that might be it. Let's see. All right. So we're getting identical results, finally. And as you can see, when we move through, we actually get that effect of the intersection of the depth plane, like I spoke. All right, so that's the first material. So in the next lesson, we'll continue forward and we're going to start making the other ones. So now that we have made the first material for the very simple plane mesh, so let's discuss a little bit more about the mesh and the other pieces that the barrier will use. And like I mentioned before, this is composed of 3 pieces. We have the squares, we have the mesh, and we have this, I would say octagon, but I guess the correct term would be chamfered squares. And if we combine them all together, we'll get the actual barrier. I didn't really go into detail on these ones because they're against the wall, so we don't really see them. And actually, I believe that for the most part, yeah, you know, and even if they would get in the way, I would just delete them. So how do you go about creating a mesh like this? Well, I can tell you I don't exactly remember all the steps I did, but I'm pretty sure it could have been something like this. Let's see, let's add a little more, and let's add an edit poly, and let's see what we can make out of this. So in chamfer, simpler than it looks, I guess. And then another edit poly. And I don't remember how I've selected all of them. I think there was probably a better way of selecting all of them. There we go. Select by 4. And we can detach this. And then we can select by 5 sides. Or 6. Doesn't seem to work. Still there for some reason. Delete that. And then we get this. Oh, yes. And then we inset this like so. And then we have, or maybe not. I'm trying to remember. Probably like this. And here's our chamfered squares. That would be another detached poly. And finally, we got our mesh. So you can see very quickly, I've redone it. and this one. I guess I messed up because it didn't select these ones, but it's okay. We just need to find out. These are all four-sided, so I'm just going to Control I to invert the selection, delete everything, and there we go. So now we would have all the free pieces that I've used. And, you know, you just need to make the UVs for this. So you would go in and you say, this is my planar UV projection. Same for this one, planar UV projection. And I'm going to add another UV set. I'm going to set it to 2. And this one is actually going to be face. So when I go to my unwrap UVW and I select 2, I should see. So actually, this is UV set 1. For some reason, the new versions of Max seem to be, especially 2017, seems to be giving me like this weird bug where it doesn't really, like, always replaces my last UV set. So if I disable this and I add this one, still not doing it. So this is correct, and this one should be the faces one. There we go. So here, you know, every single one of these guys is the same face. Right now it's displaying UV set 1, not map, looking at the first channel, not the second channel. That's why when I'm putting this, instead of seeing the whole thing in one, I'm just seeing, you know, this one over here, which I currently have disabled, which is kind of weird. And you would do the same, hopefully with a version that works with Max or Maya or Houdini or whatever you might be using. And you can probably do the same with this one. I'll check and double check really quick. So that one is this one. And this one has, yeah. So this one also has, each one of these is in the same UV space, and UV channel 1 is actually all of them in the planar projection. All right, this one. This one, I believe it's only one projection. And barrier free would be just a planar projection as well. And the each one of them. All right, so let's close this. I'm gonna move my exemplar up there, and let's get ready to make the material for the slightly rotated squares. All right, let's get started with the second element. I went ahead and I've duplicated my barrier mesh. So we have the original one here, and we're going to be working on the duplicate here. And also created the material for the second element, which we're going to start from scratch. Pretty much like the one we did in the previous lesson. We're going to set it to unlit and set it to translucent. And this one is actually kind of simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a UV coordinate. So sorry, a texture coordinate. And I'm going to set this to 1, so it uses a second UV set. And I'm going to add a panner. And in my panner, my settings were 0 and 0.2, so it's only unlocked the V. And I got a texture sample, which is this guy over here. I'm going to drag it over. And I'm going to click so you guys can see. So this texture looks like this. And it will probably make more sense if I do this. So the red channel is this bar over here that I created in Photoshop. Green channel is the same bar but kind of softer and bigger. And the blue channel is pretty much the same bar but going on an opposite direction. So I'm going to use this individually as masks. So I probably should have changed my compression settings to masks. But I digress. And I'm not clamping it either. I'm just wrapping it. So with that in mind, I'm going to actually put this as a plane. Or, alternatively, we could grab our mesh and we can actually put it here. So we can actually see how it looks directly here. The controls here are a bit weird. All right. So I'm going to add this to this so we'd see it moving. And I want to multiply the green channel. We can set it to 1 right now. And I want this to go to emissive and to the opacity. See, so it's moving it, So we get this. And another thing I did was actually set this to, so we get 2 stripes of energy going at one time. If it's not very clear what it's doing, it's actually very simple. It's just, if I put it in the cylinder, you can see it, just energy sweeping through. It just looks like this because of the way the mesh was made. It's quite interesting. A lot of detail, And let's add a color as the final one. So vector 3. Oops. Vector 3. And let me copy the values I have. So it's about 1. It's gonna get an approximate. So it's 1, 3, and 11. And you can see how it looks. Quite simple and effective. And we get a lot of cool variation. So if I save this one and we look, you can see it's identical or the same as the one I had previously. Welcome back. Let's keep going and create the third element of our barrier. So I've already, like previously, went ahead and duplicated the mesh, added a new material that we're going to start from scratch. And I'm also going to grab the material first of all. I wonder why I call the other ones refraction, but the older ones. And I'm also going to get the barrier mesh so we can see it here, so I can actually have this full screen. I think it's easier. Try to fiddle with the controls here. All right. And this before, I'm going to set this to unlit, translucent, and we have a good starting point here. I'm going to start with a time node, and I'll keep this texture sample because I know I'm gonna need one eventually, so I'm gonna just leave it there. This one I'm multiplying time by 0.7, so it's 30% slower than time actually runs. I'm going to add a constant of 1. And now I'm going to introduce the fmod. It's a very cool little math node here. So I use this one to jump back. So instead of, like the sine wave, you would go from mid gray to white, and then back to mid gray, and then to black, and then to mid gray again. This one will help me. As soon as the texture reaches white, it will jump back to black. And that's exactly what I want for this effect. But I actually want the opposite of it, because I don't want my squares to grow. I want them to shrink. I want them to come from maximum distance back to the minimum point instead of the opposite. So I'm going to set this back to I'm going to set this to -1 minus, and now I want to clamp it because I don't want actually to go to black. And I want it to start 0.1, and I'm going to add a texture coordinate here. And I'm also going to introduce scale UVs by center, which is super cool. So the other ones, you can pan the UVs from left to right or right to left, up and down, and so. But this one is actually going to shrink them or scale them up. So we will plug in this guy here. We will plug in this guy here and the actual texture coordinate. We want to use the first UV set. We're actually going to shrink our texture. And the texture itself, I'm going to grab it from our little asset browser here, content browser. So I'm going to grab the texture, and as soon as I plug it in here, it's going to start working. So it's going to shrink. See, so it shrinks, and then beep, it starts, beep, it starts. Which is pretty cool. One thing to note is that my border texture, I disabled sRGB. I'm using it as masks because I think I was planning on having more instead of the same texture, but that ended up not happening. Set up this to have high quality, and I'm clamping it. So that's kind of important to know. So when I plug in this to emissive color, we should start seeing them going from large to infinity small, and then come back to large. And I haven't used this texture sample at all, so I'm going to delete it because I actually used it again. And yeah. All right, back for more. So now that we have done the segment here, I'm going to try to compartment this thing so it's less confusing. We're going to start a different section of it. So let me just quickly check in my original material where we're going now. So I'm going to make a color, and let me again copy the values once more. So maybe 1, 3, and 11. 1, 3, and 11. And I'm going to copy it. Copy and paste. And this I want to multiply. I'm going to use a texture coordinate 1. So this one I'm actually going to use UV number 1 instead of 0. I'm going to pan it. See, it's mostly the same things over and over with a few new things here and there. I'm going to use a texture sampler. Actually, I can probably grab the texture directly. So I'm going to grab this one we discussed previously. I'm going to pan it. Let me check my panning settings. So again, I'm panning on Y. So if we take a look, it's doing this, and I want to multiply the green channel by this. So we get something that looks like this. All right. So this one is very simple. That's all it does. So let's start another one over here. And then we're going to combine all of them together. Another texture coordinate. This time it's going to be 0. I'm going to use another texture sample. Another texture I did, this one. If you guys want to take a look, it kind of looks like this. My red channel, my green channel, which is a blurred version of the red channel. And then we have a blue channel, which is just an interior. I'm going to use this to give some more detail that we don't get from the actual mesh itself. Just double check my settings and the size. Okay. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy the texture coordinate here. Okay. And this one is 0.3 and 0.3. Plug it in here. And this one is going to end up with a multiply. Right, like so. And let's start to bind them together. I'm going to make this bigger because it's kind of small. Oh, there it was. I was looking for it. So we have a multiply here, and I want to connect this one with this one. First thing, I'm using red because I was planning on putting more textures in the other two channels, but that didn't end up happening. So I could have easily converted this texture to black and white in Photoshop and make it a single channel, but you know, another way of doing it, in case I decide to put more stuff in it in the future, is to actually desaturate it. And actually, I don't want this so intense, so I'm gonna add a multiply 0.5, or sorry, 5. And this goes into the saturation, so it's gonna make it black and white. And then I wanna add a 0.2, because I guess it was not powerful enough still. So I'm adding a 0.2. Again, my color is pretty much the same as here. A little bit different. So I'm just going to copy this one. And I want to plug this guy after the add. So it's going to tint my desaturated square blue. I need to tweak the colors a little bit. So I want 3/8. So it's a bit more intense than the other one. It's 3/8, 11. 3/8, 11. It's a little bit more intense blue. And I actually want this add here from the add to the multiply. Move it here. And they are connected here, these two. All right. So far we have this chain that doesn't link anywhere yet. We got this one that does the squares shrinking. And we have this that adds more detail into the squares. Okay. So now I'm going to make the link for this piece here. So I'm going to add another texture coordinate, and it's a texture coordinate. I can copy this. I'm going to copy, Control C, I'm going to paste it, Control V. Just need to make sure that everything else is the same. So Panner, it's minus, it's actually an X, minus 0.5. And the texture is, let me close this texture here. The texture is this guy over here, this traversal gradient. All right. So I'll move it here. Delete this one, I don't need it. So here, we're gonna connect this to this guy here. So you see what it's doing? It's making this this texture blink. So we have the squares, we have the new shapes, and we have this one. That again just does a little. It's kind of hard to tell because again this is showing UV 0 and I'm on UV 1. So now we're going to connect the piece we did on top like this. We have a multiply. I'm going to add another multiply. And I'm going to connect this and connect that. And this will connect to emissive color. Like so. And I am going to add I'm going to add this one. With this one. I'm going to multiply this by 6. Put this in the A channel, first input, and set it there. So these two are being added together. And I'm going to add another add. And I'm going to add another texture. This guy over here. You can see he has this hand-drawn in Photoshop shape. It's not really an hexagon, but I named it so. And finally, we're going to connect it to the opacity. So we get this. All right. And save this and apply. So if we see, we're getting a similar result, not exactly the same. So I was backtracking my steps and I found why it's different. And the reason why it was different is because I've connected the full color into my B here, and I actually just wanted the blue channel. And we get this result, which is what I was looking for. So if I save this, apply and save, now they should be exactly the same. And that concludes our third layer of the barrier, and we'll just move on to make the final layer. And you know, it seemed quite complicated at the beginning, but we just did the same thing pretty much over and over with slightly alterations here and there. And because we laid out the UVs in an interesting way using two different UV sets and the way we made our textures, we were able to achieve this quite complicated effect, or quite complicated looking, I should say, very easily and very effectively. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Okay, let's get started with the fourth layer, the mesh layer. And as you can see in the original one, I didn't even bother about deleting the side faces since they are up against the wall. And also, it also has back faces, so in this situation where you actually wanted to make this double-sided, you would get more three-dimensionality out of it. But I thought the effect was already quite visually noisy, so I decided to make it just one-sided. So let's get started with it. So I'm going to open the material. As before, we're going to set this to be an unlit and translucent. And we're going to go recreate that material. So texture coordinate, we're going to set it to be UV0. Make sure I have enough space. I'm going to add a panner. I'm going to connect this to this. Let me double check my panner settings. So I'm going to move on V, I'm going to move 0, 1 very, very slowly. I'm going to grab my grid texture that I did. It's Photoshop texture of a grid. Not completely symmetrical. You could have made it completely symmetrical. I just didn't bother with it, especially because I wanted to have a bit more irregularity, and also, yeah. And I didn't want it to be exactly the same, but you know, you could very easily do this using the ruler and all that stuff, or maybe do it in Max or Maya. Drag this here. Make sure it's gonna move. So if I connect it to emissive, you see that the grid is moving slowly. So if you look at over time, you'll see that it's never really always the same. And also I want to make sure that this is actually twice the size. Twice the tiling, I should say. I'm gonna add another panner here, which is gonna be minus 0.06. Duplicate this texture because I want to use the same one. Connect that, and I'm going to use another texture coordinate. Honestly, I didn't even need to use this one, but it's pretty much not doing anything. But for consistency, we can add it also here, but we really didn't need this one here, but just to make it more consistent. And this one is actually going to pan in two directions. So it's going to be 0, minus 5, and minus 0.03. And we're going to use a different texture here. Just to be a very contrasty noise texture done in Photoshop. So connect it there. So you can see it's moving very slowly in two different axes, or axes. multiply these two together. And I'm just using one channel there. You can do it like this. It's fine. So see, we start getting some irregularity in the texture. And then I want to multiply the first texture we created with the multiplication of these two. And we should see even more irregularity. It's a very complex looking effect. And as you see, these lines are moving and they're irregular. You know, they're not all at the same distance. Some variations is quite good to make effects look more realistic, I would say. Of course, if you would prefer perfection and everything symmetrical, please go ahead and do that. But I felt like this, energy barrier should have a little bit more organic feel to it, even though it's made out of technology. I still wanted like some irregularity. I'm going to make a vector 3 color. And I'm going to copy some values here. So it's going to be 0.052, and then I'm going to copy and paste this value here. So we should see this bluish color here. Okay. I'm going to add these two together. So we got it to be blue and white. And I'm going to create another panner here. Oops. Panner. And grab my texture sample that we've seen before, so I'm just going to copy and paste. So this guy over here. So let me quickly backtrack my steps. We got this 3 over here. That's correct. I'll multiply these two together, and then I'll multiply the results by this one. And then I'm actually going to have an add here. I'm going to disconnect this one because I think it's not correct. So add a vector, add a constant 1, make an add, and multiply this one by this one. Sorry, add them together. Again, it's not necessary to do this. Probably had other things connected. Yeah, that's actually, I think it's a good time to explain like why this happens so often in my workflow. So I probably had another panners and multiplications going over here, and the way it connected, they would add together at this point. But because I've decided not to do that, instead of recreating the whole chain, what I did is basically simply replacing this the whole chain by a 0, so it's not adding anything. So it saved me a lot of time. You could have also made a switch and stuff like that, but this was pretty easy to do it this way. And that said, I want to add a multiply. And we need another color. Just going to copy and paste the color here. And the values are 0.7, 3.7, and 11. Going to multiply. This one will add with that color over there. So we're having these two colors added together. It looks like this. Stop the preview. This is so far so good. I'm gonna move this one down. I'm gonna add another multiply. Again, just the green channel. And it's gonna be very, very faint, so it's gonna be 0.1. And I will be adding I'll be adding the 0.1 with this one. Okay, so we get this very slow moving line. Actually, right now it's completely stationary, so it's gonna be 0.5. So now we got the lines moving across while all the other stuff is flowing down. Very electronic looking. And very simply, we're just gonna use the output of this add, and we're gonna connect with the opacity. And there you have it, the final layer. Final layer in our barrier. So you can see it looks exactly the same. So let me just delete this one. I'm just gonna put it back, although it's the same. But these ones have a lot more stuff into it. I can actually show you too. Actually, this one probably not. But if I would put, for instance, I would put maybe refraction free. You can see there's a lot more stuff that I didn't show in some notes, why something was not working, to make sure I explain to you guys. Like for instance, this one, the texture, there's a reason why I actually had to put this as a cinematic in no mipmaps, because when the compression was too high, it was not giving the result I wanted. It was giving some errors to it. So that was one thing. So let me put back my swipe texture into this. So yeah, I want to make sure that I keep the original materials I did before, because they have a lot more things I could explore in the future. But that said, here's our final barrier result. And if you select everything, you can actually move it and use it in different prospects. So it's pretty cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed this week's lesson, and we achieved something pretty cool looking, and I'll see you guys next week.